When I think of growing up, I think about all the games, shows, and movies I would escape into. I always felt pretty alone growing up. I never seemed to fit in with any group perfectly in school. Even the art kids I had trouble getting along with, despite my undying love for art. For me, shows created a world I could live in for the day. I could forget my own worries and be in the life of these characters. I know it might sound sad, but honestly, it wasn't. I love that we are able to create art that gives people a sense of belonging, makes them feel seen. I'm hoping that in some way this podcast can help you feel like you can relate to others and be seen as well. Today's guest was also often alone and deeply into sci fi and fantasy, but was able to create his very own world, all his own, through nothing more than a pen and pencil. I'm your host, Jacob Johnson. This is the Myartisreal podcast, a narrative journey into the lives that shape art. Today's episode, Alex Kuno, right after the break. This episode is, of course, brought to you by you, the listener. If you enjoy the show, please share it with everyone that you know and consider leaving us a review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. If you want to take your support a step further, you can collect limited edition art prints that are now available on our website, myartisreal.com, or sign up to our Patreon page at patreon.com/myartisreal. It's that time of the year again, and we are media partners for the Beautiful Bazaar Art Prize. By submitting to the contest, you will have the chance to win prize money and so much more. Head to beautifulbazaarartprize.art for all the information. Submissions close July 17th. 2024. Thank you, and back to the episode. Today we will be hearing the story of Alex Kuno, a full-time artist and illustrator from St. Paul, Minnesota. What was it like for you growing up in Minnesota?
Looking back on it now, as a kid, it was a really beautiful place. We had, a giant lawn, and we lived really close to the Rum River and the Mississippi River, and it was kind of like this sort of small town sort of vibe. And then, in high school and, living with my family and stuff, I kind of started to see sort of like the darker underbelly of it, a lot of the racism, a lot of the bigotry, and, it's sort of the darker aspects of that sort of small town environment. Now that I'm getting older, now I do see like the value of just like, living as a little kid back then, not, realizing all the other stuff that was going on, just like playing. It was a great place to play as a child.
When being a kid, nothing beats having a large body of water nearby to throw rocks in, to fish in, or to even build a ramp and jump your bike off into it, like me and my cousin did. You get to go on all sorts of adventures.
When I was a kid, there was like kind of this Tom Sawyer sort of feel to it when you're living so close to the river and you're just like kind of playing with your friends and your family and brothers and stuff like that, and kind of running around and digging in the sand.
And as you were getting older, what kind of stuff were you getting into?
Yeah, early childhood, there was a lot of, I guess, sort of imaginative or imagination-based playing. And then, we'd play with our GI Joes in the sandbox and melt them down and turn them into other creatures and things like that. And then as I started to read and kind of develop creatively, then I became a full-on nerd and indoor kid. And then I sort of kind of withdrew into fantasy and sci-fi and things like that.
When you say nerd stuff, what exactly are you referring to?
Dungeons and Dragons and other role-playing games. I read a lot of Stephen King and Michael Crichton and Tolkien, and a lot of like kind of dark sci-fi movies and things like that.
Dungeons and Dragons is absolutely incredible. I would play it more now if I could find a group of people to actually play with. But around the time of it first coming out, a lot of parents didn't understand it and got pretty scared, thinking their kids were going to be summoning some kind of demon into the house. Did your parents get like all scared of you playing Dungeons and Dragons and that sort of thing?
Not the Dungeons and Dragons, not the Dungeons and Dragons, but I did have like a really dark imagination. Yeah, I think that they were, and they've told me a number of times that they were like kind of concerned about some of the things that I was drawing and like watching. They tried to like insulate me from like from that like kind of darker entertainment. But that just like made me that much more addicted and more obsessed with it. It's like that kind of, if you're, being withheld something, you're always going to like kind of focus in on it. So I think that just kind of exacerbated it.
I'm into a lot of those things as well, but even more so into video games, art, and film. And I think what draws a lot of us so called nerds into these worlds is because they are worlds we can find comfort in. A world that we can understand and make sense of and feel like we belong. Alex was so into these other worlds, he began to create his own, and even to this day, when looking at his works, you see this bizarre fantasy world he rendered from his mind onto the canvas. And so, when did you start drawing?
Some of my earliest memories has been sitting at a table or a desk drawing.
And like you said before, these drawings became pretty bizarre for even his parents. And what were you drawing at that time that was so, scary for them?
At first, like kind of the earliest drawings, they were, dinosaurs and saber-toothed tigers and things like that. And then I think that they just kind of became just more grotesque cyborgs and robots and ripping heads off, and this kind of investigation of like guts and violence and things.
I wish I could describe the current works of Alex to you, but I fear words would just not do it justice. As his style is so unique and out there, you need to just see it for yourself. I could only imagine how upset his parents would have been if this was the art he was making as a young kid. But as a kid, I'm sure his art was more tame. One of his biggest inspirations growing up for these artworks were Monty Python, which was a British comedy troupe formed in 1969.
But also, like, another huge influence on me growing up as a kid was Monty Python. And I think I still carry a lot of that in my own work too, of like just really cartoonish levels of violence or obviously artificial depictions of violence that's like kind of satirizing the concept of violence in art or media.
Of course, his parents tried to keep him from watching Monty Python, but he always found a way.
My parents also, when I was at a certain age, they kind of shielded me from some Monty Python, but I was the youngest in my family. And so when they would introduce my older brother to Monty Python episodes, I would still like kind of sneak in and like into the living room and like kind of watch some of those episodes. And they didn't realize that I was doing that.
He then did what any kid would do and continued to draw whatever he wanted to.
A lot of those kind of younger feelings of like, oh no, kind of the shame of like either disappointing or upsetting my parents, but then also like there's something that I have to keep doing then, like if they're, scared or nervous about this, then there was like this kind of uninvestigated thought that I had of like I have to keep doing it then. Like that's what you have to do, is that you have to keep doing it. Yeah, and so I think that kind of drove home that sort of subversive element, or the importance of like dwelling on those things or trying to work through them on your own. I think that's kind of where that came from. Definitely, I didn't feel like they were like I was doing anything wrong or subversive, but in the fact that they were being looked at as being subversive or dangerous, that made me want to do it more.
Like I said before, Alex needed to create his own worlds and began to do so at a young age through his drawings.
The drawing was always like a really, really necessary thing for me to, it was just the way to process the world. I think like with my parents' relationship, there were things that I just kind of needed to escape from, and I needed to kind of create a little world that I had control over. That was like also when I was really young. So when I was like into high school, I think that just kind of became a more just natural impulse that I had. I just kind of built that into my life as a kid. And so I was always just kind of doodling, or if I'd be at home, just kind of sketching. It was just like, it was a little safe place that I had.
And at what point in your life did you realize that's what you had been doing this whole time? Was creating this world that you could feel comfortable in?
It wasn't until I started painting professionally. I think when I was really interested in writing and theater and music and like, different arts type things in high school and college. But then when I sort of had to sit down and decide where I had to what I had to focus on and where I had to go with this stuff. I just kind of went, well, I'm going to go to college and get my Bachelor of Arts degree and see where that goes. But because I just needed to, I needed to go with the thing that brought me back to that sort of childhood feeling of safety. Like I didn't really care where I went with the art stuff or I went with visual art. I just needed to kind of have that feeling of being able to make a living while sitting in a room and drawing and painting. And then when I like actually stepped back and realized, oh my God, I'm actually doing that, is my way of processing the world, or my emotions in the world, by sitting in a room by myself making pictures. So it's kind of like it just wound up happening that way.
I was always into building computers, servers, and coding growing up. I always assumed I would go into IT or something along those lines. Well, that was until I saw the street art documentary Exit Through the Gift Shop, and my whole view on life changed. Alex didn't have anything he wanted to do with his life besides be creative and make art.
It was just I wanted to just focus my life on that. You know, it's embarrassing to say, but I wanted to focus my life on that early childhood feeling of comfort of like, if I'm wherever I'm going to go, I want to focus on that kind of feeling for myself and build my life around that. That was kind of the impulse.
I would say that's a pretty smart way to go about life, to build your life around what brings you the most joy. With that goal in mind, Alex ventured off into college to study art, but the school he went to at the time didn't seem to even take the art department seriously.
I just went to the University of Minnesota. It wasn't even like any kind of prestigious art school. Like the year I graduated was the year that the plans came down that they were going to build a whole new art facility. So the one that I had was just like this rundown, just dilapidated warehouse. It would rain and the garbage cans outside of the building would have like dead rats in them and stuff like that. And there would be gas leaks. And it was just like this kind of forgotten area of the University of Minnesota. And I didn't really care about that. I just wanted to, I wanted to spend college painting and drawing. And so I went there and that was fine. I didn't have any real thoughts about the future or or anything like that. I was just like in my own head and just wanted to just try different forms of art and forms of painting and just focus on my own imagination and just kind of have that place to go.
Because of the way this department was ran, Alex ended up just painting and drawing in ways he felt comfortable. It wasn't until recent years that he started to actually try and learn to do things in a more proper, traditional way.
Over the past few years, I've been really trying to focus on my technique or sort of refine things on my own and teach myself, try to find like a new combination of mediums or ways of working that are best suited to me. And it's been like this whole 2, 3, 4 year long process of like trying to teach myself, really how to paint in watercolor or how to really paint in oil paintings and what are the real steps to do that. Because I just feel like since I graduated from college, I kind of like made up my own way of working or my own set of materials, and I just wanted to like learn like how do you actually like stretch watercolor paper and how do you do that. And so I've learned on a technical skill just from like YouTube tutorials or talking to my friends. I've learned way more on from that than I ever did going to school in that particular environment. No offense to those professors or anything, but that's just like how I feel. Like I've learned so much more over the past few years just by teaching myself than I ever did.
I know your parents were pretty upset about your early drawings, but when it became time for you to go to college and you were pursuing art, were they supportive?
Well, my mom was always really supportive and encouraging of doing the art stuff, and she was and still is like just really supportive and loving that way. That was kind of like the way that she showed how she loved me, I think. And my dad was much more reserved about it. I remember sitting with him and he asked me, what I wanted to do, and I said, I wanted to get into art. And then he said, "Oh, good. Well, then you'll know where all the good soup kitchens are." And like that was like the end of that conversation. But I think like, he died right before I moved to New York. And, there was like something kind of liberating or freeing of that. It was like, oh, okay, well then I'm going to go to New York then.
I think most people who are into art and the culture around it have a very romantic idea of what New York City is. I know Alex and I share in this romanticism of New York City. I remember the first time I went to go see an art show of a friend named John Paul Faves. He was doing a show in New York, and me and my dad got out of the cab near the Airbnb. We went to this pizza place that just happened to be right there. And it also happened to be the very popular Prince Street Pizza. But inside the store, they had, pizza sitting up there. And this guy walks in, he asks, "Hey, do you have anything besides pepperoni?" The guy behind the counter just looks at him and says, "I got what I got. You either get it or you get the F out." And for me, that moment was like, oh crap, we really are in New York. And I know that sounds silly, but that's really how I felt. New York City has always been seen as this capital of art and culture. So Alex thought, what better place to go if you want to become an artist?
Kind of growing up reading and watching a lot of movies, I really, had this incredibly romantic idea of New York City and like really drawn to it from like the 70s movies. I wanted to be a part of like kind of that grimy darkness. I just wanted to see it. And then, like learning about like the Soho art scene in the 80s and like all this stuff, I was just so drawn to it and just wanted to experience like the worst case scenario of like, I just wanted to see like how difficult is it really? Like, how hard is it? It was just like this dollhouse I just had to like kind of figure out or, just sort of be a part of it. And, my dad like just was so like growing up, you always like kind of rail against it and how it's just, this terrible place, this terrible, fearful place. And that I'd never do anything there. It wouldn't work out. And it was just like this failure waiting to happen, but I just had to go there and do that. And so then when he died, I think that was like kind of like it was sort of a weird way to. I was at a point in life. I had just graduated college. I was just like kind of like trying to either figure out what to do and where to go. And then when he died, it just like was kind of like, oh, now I know where to go. It was kind of like a reflex of like, yeah, I'm gonna try it now.
And after only being in the city for 10 days, 9/11 happened.
I was so new to the city. I had just gotten there. I had moved there with my girlfriend at the time, and we had barely moved in. We had barely like unpacked. We didn't know anybody there. We didn't have any connections, and so I think we were like up really late the night before, and so we had slept through like all the news. We didn't even have like a it was before like widespread internet or anything like that. We didn't like pick up a phone and check Twitter or anything. It was like, you had to turn on the TV in order to like learn any, I think we slept through like a bunch of phone calls that we had got. So like we wound up learning about it the way a lot of people out of state learned about it too. But it was like that kind of aftermath throughout the day, which was really just so surreal of the people walking home. We lived in Astoria, Queens, which was, a significant distance from the World Trade Center. And so, but I mean, later that afternoon, there were just, hordes of people like walking back home from working in Manhattan, and all the trains had shut down and everything like that. And then I think it was like a month after, the smell from the smoke, the smoke had drifted into the area, or it wasn't a month later. It was like, I don't know how long it took for the smoke to arrive. I remember seeing weather reports of like, well, the smoke is drifting up to the Upper East Side, and now it's kind of like crawling across the river and stuff like that. And when the smell hit, that was like horrifying, because that was like you could just smell the metal, like the burnt metal and the death, and like you could just smell it in the air. That was really grisly. And then it was like after that, there was like a giant blackout that knocked out the whole Eastern Seaboard, and there's the blackout in our neighborhood there was also that also just shut down the whole city for a while. There was a small earthquake in Queens after that too. It was all just crazy.
I can't even begin to imagine the fear you would have not only moving to a new big city, but also facing one of the most terrifying things to ever happen in your life in that same new city. While still trying to process the recent events and get used to the city, Alex needed to find a job before his savings ran out.
And I was just like aimlessly walking around, just kind of looking to see what sort of jobs might be available. And I just went to Soho and I just kind of like wandered around, and maybe a gallery might happen to want to hire me for something. I had no like valid degree. I had no, I didn't have my master's or anything like that. I had no job experience. I just had like a portfolio that I carried around, which had some of my work from my BFA exhibition, to prove that I was an artist. And like back then, if you were to submit work to a gallery, you had to mail slides. And, I had like a 3-ring binder of my slides from my work that I just carried around. And I walked into just a gallery. I'd never heard of it. I think it might have been in a phone book, maybe, that I found the number, and I just walked in. And then the director, the owner of the gallery, just hired me. and then I was just a guy. Who worked there. So, yeah, that was the first job. It was the first day that I started to look for a job. I got hired there.
A job in a gallery, that must be fun, right? Wrong. Completely wrong.
It was like a really terrible mistake. It didn't really pay anything. They didn't really have a particular need for me there. They kept like kind of finding work for me. I would like show up and then they would say, I don't know, do you want to clean the bathrooms, or do you want to work at the front desk, or I don't know, maybe like organize stuff in the basement. And so a lot of the time they just, I was just like, just organizing work in the basement, because the basement looked like kind of a hoarder's house. It was just like jam packed. There's the artist Mark Dion who was represented there, and he was famous because he made like these giant assemblages, these giant installations of like junk. And so like I had to catalog, like a beach ball that would go to this certain installation that he had, or some like deer heads or something like that. It was really kind of overwhelming down there.
I'm just going to go ahead and say it, because we all know it to be true. There's a lot of egos and pretentiousness that goes on in the art world, and Alex came face to face with that pretty quickly.
Yeah, I was like kind of dealing with these egos, and I felt like because I was from Minnesota, I had like this kind of more diligent like work ethic, or I felt like I had to like work really hard at what I was doing, and nobody else was doing that. And I was like getting really like frustrated and annoyed by all of it. And there was no direction for any of that like energy to go. I just had to like relax, but I really couldn't. And I was like getting like antsy. Why did I move here for, to, work at a place like this? And then, like one of my errands was like picking up medications for my boss, but occasionally I would be able to like deliver artwork and hang shows. There was a lot of that. So I did do some like art installation, some of those sort of projects, and working at openings and things.
It wasn't all bad though. He got to go to some pretty incredible events and meet some really cool artists.
Those were the kind of experiences that I went to have, I guess. And so I did. And, I was able to like, work at like the Armory show in Chelsea. And I did have like good, like kind of professional art experiences there. And that I still think about, and I still, definitely am glad that I had. But yeah, like I was saying, like kind of those egos and personalities and stuff that I, needed, that I really wanted to experience and see, just to like see how bad it got. I was able to like experience those.
But while he was there, he continued to make his own art and even started to get some exhibitions.
Show in New York that I had was actually at Appalachian State University in Boone, North Carolina. that was the first time I had been to the South. Actually, was they had opened a new art center there, and I think just because, and I don't even remember how, but I kind of got looped into this early website, kind of this collective of figurative artists in New York. I can't remember how I met them, but I'm still in touch with a few of them. And I think just because I have, the internet was still relatively kind of new then. And I happened to have just lucked into getting in touch with this group of these like more established artists, that I happened to be on this database. And and this university, they were just happened to be looking for figurative artwork. Because I was in New York, there was like this reputation that was just assumed about me. Like, oh, he's a New York artist. I had just moved there, so I was a part of this show. So I was like, I didn't have a car out there at all in New York at all, and so I was like carrying big, like giant canvases on the train and stuff like that, painting and varnishing things in the hallway of my building, and just kind of doing what I could around there. And I had like some shows in bars and cafes and restaurants in my neighborhood. After that, I was making some sales, but yeah, it was like I had quite a few. I had quite a few like little shows here and there. It was a good time.
But just as soon as he was finding his footing in the art world, Alex and his wife decided to make the move back to Minnesota. Then everything collapsed.
Then I just kind of found myself, I think, making work for shows in Minneapolis. I think while I was out there, I wasn't like really producing much. I think I was just getting kind of burned out and frustrated, and still like 9/11 was like just making everything just still just so chaotic. I had gotten married, and then my to the girlfriend that I had moved out to New York with, and then she wanted to move back to Minneapolis, and so then I kind of went back with her, and then that immediately fell apart. And so then when I was like, I got back to Minneapolis, everything had just kind of collapsed, and I just felt like I was in a completely different city, and I was just like utterly lost when I moved back there.
Throughout his whole life until this point, he was always following those steps society wants you to follow. Go to college, get a job, get married. But now he started to feel conflicted, questioning every decision he had made up until this point. And why was he even making art in the first place? Where was this all going?
I just, everything just felt like completely alien to me. And I didn't know what I was doing, or what the art stuff was for, or why I moved out to New York in the first place, and what I was doing back in Minneapolis, or who I was, or what I wanted to do. And so there were quite a few years of that, and of like living in Minneapolis and just getting like kind of like bad desk jobs, and working at tech support and stuff like that, and just like occasionally working on some little drawings or something like that. I just felt like I had just been completely burned out. And then because I had spent my whole life being focused on art and my own art, my own imagination, to like not have any idea what any of that meant, those were like a pretty hard years. And it took maybe about a decade to like actually find my footing again, art wise.
While he felt lost, he didn't stop painting entirely. He would continuously put out his artworks, make some sales here and there, but inside he just didn't have that same level of confidence. Life tends to do that to us, right? Because when you're young and broke, you have nowhere to go but up. But if you fall back down that hill even slightly, you can take a huge hit to your confidence and struggle to make it back up that hill, or you can even decide to change your path entirely. Alex didn't give up on his art though. He kept putting one foot in front of the other, moving up that mountain. Because of course it wasn't about the money, it wasn't about the fame for Alex. It was about that world of his that he had created. Without knowing what was next, that world was a comfort for him.
I was still like having shows and making art regularly. It was always just a struggle to like have any idea of like what I was doing, because again, I'd never had any like real plans about what I was going to do, or what my goal was, or anything. And so I was just like, I didn't know who I was when I moved back from New York at all. And just kind of living in Minneapolis for just kind of no reason. And then I wound up, I kind of had to like build that back up over time. I would go to work, I would come home, and I would just draw, or I would just paint, or I would just like research other forms of art, or I would just read about it. I think it was still like a continuation of that, the whole doing the art thing, that wasn't about money. It was just because I had to do it. And it was the way to keep me out of the newspaper. It was or to keep me off the news.
Thanks to Etsy, doing more art shows, and social media, he was able to finally make more and more sales.
I think maybe I set up an Etsy shop or I had some good sales locally that at least I was able to pay, a few months rent with my work that like gave me like this hyper confidence to go, I'm quitting my job. I'm going to do this. And so that I quit my job and then all those sales like dried up afterward. I was like, I'm back. I made it. I'm here. And then I just back to just making nothing.
But he just needed more time.
But then over time, there was kind of like a rhythm sort of developed with the sales and the shows. And then it became to a point where even though I wasn't necessarily making enough to live off of really, but I was like too busy to work full time on my own artwork. And so then I just had to focus on my artwork and kind of beg and borrow and just save or just kind of like adapt to a life of just real kind of Spartan amenities for like a long time. But then, it just kind of just became my life.
Even if he would have to cut way back on expenses to be able to spend his days painting and hit his deadlines for projects, he didn't care. No matter what he did, he couldn't force himself to continue to do these soul-crushing office jobs any longer. So how did you feel at that time trying so hard to make a living off art?
I felt like I was crazy and not fit for society. Like I wasn't able to there must have been something wrong with me that I hated working office jobs or like I hated like that kind of structure. There must have been something wrong with me that I have to make art instead, or that I have to do this kind of thing. I don't know what it is.
Alex was just born to be an artist.
At the same time, I felt like I was doing what I was supposed to be doing. I guess it's as simple as that. Like I'm supposed to be doing this stuff. It's like the reason that I hated these other things or that I hated that life is because I was supposed to be doing this stuff. And it was also, really painful because I had like a lot of other relationships that I was in that I couldn't like focus on, or, I couldn't be a good partner with any of my girlfriends, or like, I couldn't maintain a lot of friendships because I was just so focused on my own work and my need to do this stuff. And I wasn't given any kind of, this is the right business plan that you're supposed to have, or this is the right structure you're supposed to live. I had to make it up on my own. And that was the most maddening thing. There wasn't anybody that I could like look to like teach me how to do that stuff.
That's one thing I really hope to provide for other artists with this podcast, is a way for them to hear how others made it in their career path and pull some nuts of wisdom from each episode that they can apply to their own journey. No two paths are going to be the same, but hearing how all these other people did it allow us to figure out our own way to achieve our dream. But we all have to go through that same phase of throwing everything we can at the wall and hoping something sticks.
I eventually moved to this area in St. Paul, this lower town neighborhood, quite a few years ago, I think. And it's this area that's like a lot of old warehouses that are zoned for artists. And it's like artists only housing, like live workspaces. So it's sort of like big loft areas that, have like certain rental requirements. And I think the first one that I moved into was above a frame shop, and it was like really, really run down and really bare bones and a lot of bullet holes in windows and cracks in the literal walls and stuff like that. So it was like really drafty, and shared bathrooms and stuff. And so I kind of found myself in that place, but it was like geared toward it was like this kind of like free for all place where you could sort of just do whatever you wanted and just like kind of make art. And I think I had like quit my last job and I was working there, and I thought I was just going to only be an artist and only make my own work and just kind of see what happens.
And it was in this cobbled together art walk studio live-in sort of space that Alex was able to grow his career significantly and step his foot on the top of that always scary mountain of doing what you love for a living. He began to get even more validation and appreciation for his work from outsiders.
Even though that place was really run down and like really dangerous to live in, it was also like it just it was like there was sort of this blank canvas sort of feeling, and it was very much like a metaphor for my life at the time. And I was able to just be in my room, essentially in my loft space, and just work and just paint.
I like to ask artists at the end of these episodes where they plan to go now. What is the next step for them? Sure, we can plan our next show or print release or podcast appearance, but life is always changing and the big picture changes rapidly. Alex told me he has some loose plans. Hell, he might even move across some states again. But how do you even plan 5 years in the future, especially when you work in a field that can change any day?
All of this can just go away. Like later today, all of it could fall apart, and whatever kind of system I built to help sustain myself is based purely and exclusively on luck or people's interest in my work. There have been so many times when I would be like coming toward the end of the month and going, I don't have any money in my bank account. I have no idea how I'm going to pay rent. I have no idea what my life is going to look like. I have no idea what's going to happen. And then I would get a sale that would sustain me for 3 months. That's happened to me too many times for it to not like completely fall, completely collapse around me. So that's always an issue. It's always something that's in the back of my mind.
What Alex does know for sure now is that he is an artist, and that this world he has built for himself to escape into has become a world for others who feel lost and alone, a place they can find comfort, no matter how bizarre his world might seem.
Like even though things are always uncertain now, the thing that I do have that I didn't back then was that I know that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. Like I know, it's in my taxes. The federal government recognizes me as an artist, and I'm pushing 50. It's embedded in my life. I have so far edged myself out of being qualified for any other work at all for the rest of my life. I'm literally not qualified to do anything else. So yeah. So if that's any kind of comfort, that's where I'm at.
Alex is without a doubt an artist. It might have took him many years and trials and tribulations to finally fully embrace his life and achieve the status of full-time artist, but he finally did it. He has become so popular now that he was even tasked with making several artworks for the band Tool. This collaboration was so popular, it has caused him to experience a whole new level of recognition, like when he told me he was walking down the street and a car just stopped to yell out his name at him. But even with all these screaming fans out of car windows, Alex remains that humble person who cares about one thing and one thing only: sharing his own creative world. I enjoyed my conversation with Alex so much, I wish I could include all of it, but we have to keep things moving along. This show is growing every day, and I couldn't do it without you, the listener. If you enjoy this show, please help me out by sharing it with anyone you can think that would enjoy it. As always, if you want to take it a step further, you can purchase some limited edition art prints that are now available on Myartisreal.com, or sign up to our Patreon page at patreon.com/Myartisreal. The cheapest plan is only $3, and just that $3 changes my life. Thank you for listening to the podcast, and I will see you in the next episode.